Would you lock yourself in a room for 2 weeks after being infected with COVID-19? Chris Holdsworth would, and he hopes that come January, that's exactly what he'll be doing.
Because the payoff is potentially so great, I feel like it merits taking slightly more risk.
Chris has volunteered to be a guinea pig for a world-first study that could take place in the UK in January. It's called a human challenge trial, and it involves shutting healthy volunteers in an isolation unit, like this one, and deliberately infecting them with coronavirus. Why? Well, some scientists believe challenge trials could help to bring the pandemic to an end faster. Andrew Catchpole is one of them.
So they can bring a pandemic to an end faster because it enables us to do two things. One, learn about the disease, but more importantly, while we're setting these up, is the aim is that they can test vaccines very much faster.
Andrew is the Chief Scientific Officer for hVivo, a UK-based company that's been running challenge studies for other respiratory viruses like influenza and the common cold for 20 years. Now, they want to do the same thing for coronavirus.
What we're going to do here is to conduct human viral challenge studies. And what we mean by that is they are studies where you directly administer the pathogen, which in this case is the coronavirus. So in these studies, we have a very controlled medical grade version of the virus which we will give to the volunteers.
The study, if given regulatory approval, will take place at the Royal Free Hospital in North London, in an isolation unit almost identical to this one at hVivo's facility in Whitechapel. The first study, conducted in collaboration with scientists from Imperial College London, will hope to establish the smallest amount of coronavirus needed to infect a person.
So the virus is firstly heavily diluted, and this is done in a manufacturing facility because we're giving very low quantities of the virus, and then it will be administered by small amounts of droplets with a pipette.
That data will then be used in further studies in which new volunteers will be infected with the virus to test the effectiveness of vaccines.
So on this first study, what we're trying to achieve is to answer the very specific question of how much virus is required to safely cause an infection. So we're not even trying to actually have symptoms in these volunteers.
So why can a challenge trial speed up the hunt for a vaccine? Standard human vaccine trials take place in 3 stages. Phase 1 trials involve up to 100 people and are largely to test a vaccine candidate's safety and to determine optimum dosage. In Phase 2, several hundred people are inoculated and researchers look for an immune response or any major side effects. In Phase 3, a pool of thousands or even tens of thousands of participants are either given the vaccine or a placebo. These final trials show the effectiveness of the vaccine and hopefully identify any rare side effects which may have been missed in smaller trials. This all takes time because participants must be left to be exposed to the virus naturally, and as infection rates fluctuate and people take mitigation measures against exposure, like masks and social distancing, the chance that people will be exposed gets slimmer. And this is where researchers believe bringing the infection process in-house could speed things along.
A vaccine trial with a human challenge study could be conducted in as short as potentially 2 months, but more likely probably 4 months. Whereas to do the same thing and in the field would take many more months, and actually the length of time in the field would completely depend on how much disease there was in the community.
Infecting people with pathogens in the name of science isn't a recent idea. For much of the history of human civilization, one of our great viral foes was smallpox. Killing 3 out of every 10 people who caught it, this highly contagious illness infected ancient Egyptian pharaohs, Roman emperors, and US presidents in a reign of terror that lasted from around 10,000 BC until 40 years ago, when, in 1980, thanks to a World Health Organization mass vaccination program, it was finally declared eradicated on Earth.
Smallpox was driven away from our globe.
The end of smallpox is one of the great success stories of modern medicine, and it can, in essence, be traced back to an early and rather unethical challenge trial carried out on an 8-year-old boy. In 1796, Edward Jenner, a British physician and scientist, wanted to test his theory that cowpox, a less deadly version of smallpox, could be transmitted to humans and provide protection from its more dangerous cousin. So, Jenner deliberately infected his gardener's son, first with cowpox, then with smallpox. Luckily for Jenner, and humanity, after his cowpox inoculation, the boy not only survived contact with smallpox, but didn't display any signs of disease at all. This discovery led to the field of vaccinology, humanity's greatest weapon against viral infections to date, and a technology responsible for saving millions of lives. Needless to say, Jenner's experiment wouldn't have cut the mustard in the modern age. Nowadays, meticulous care is taken to ensure the safety of participants.
This is HVivo's quarantine facility. And the main entrance here. At the moment, we do not have quarantine operations in place, hence we're allowed to go in our normal day clothes as opposed to in scrubs. You can see to start with we have an interlocking door to help maintain different air pressures and to keep the quarantine safe.
For the coronavirus trial, volunteers will go through a screening process to make sure none of them have any underlying health conditions.
The volunteers will come into this quarantine unit and they will enter the rooms, and that is where they will stay for the duration of the quarantine, so up to about 2 weeks total in duration.
So on admission, they are requested to provide a spare clothing that we then collect. We clearly mark it and then we lock it away for duration of their inpatient stay. We disinfect all their luggage and their belongings alongside the laptops before entering into the quarantine. And once they're in quarantine, this is basically their kingdom.
They'll be tested twice daily for the virus and closely monitored by nurses throughout their stay. HVivo will only be recruiting volunteers in the lowest risk factor band. That's people between 18 and 30 with no underlying health conditions. But although the risk is low, it is still there.
I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some fear there. Of course there is. And to be honest, one of the things that actually concerns me slightly more than that is all of the discussions now around long COVID. That's even more uncertain.
Volunteers are compensated for their time, but not for risk, because apart from it being hard to quantify, challenge studies must be careful not to over-incentivise people to participate.
It's about getting that balance correct. For example, if you offer them a pound to do the challenge trial, then clearly you're not fairly compensating for their time. If you offer them £1 million, then you're clearly over-incentivising them such they may not fully consider what they're doing and go about it in the right informed consent way.
Chris may not be selected for the study, but if he is, he says he isn't bothered about the money.
Obviously, it sounds very high and mighty to say it's not why I'm doing it, but, it isn't.
Andrew says he's heard this a lot from volunteers, with many keen to do their bit to bring the pandemic to an end.
You saw particularly during the first lockdown, the stress it was putting on key workers, particularly healthcare workers and care homes, and you did kind of feel a bit, I guess, almost like helpless. You wanted to help, but there's only so much that you could do.
The study's currently waiting regulatory and ethical approval. If it gets it, trials will begin in January in what is likely to be a world first. And with applications now in the tens of thousands, filling beds at the Royal Free should be easy.
We would argue that it's almost not ethical not to do these studies, because if there's a faster way of determining whether a vaccine is working and getting a vaccine to market, then surely we should be using that method to do so, because every day that this pandemic is progressing without an effective vaccine on the market, there's more severe infections and more death, as well as a more economic burden. So if we can help by bringing us all back to normal sooner and quashing this pandemic, then we believe that's the right thing to do.